My name is Isabel. I'm 37 years old, and I've lived in the same small town my entire life. Some days, I think I know every crack in the pavement between my house and the church. I work part time as a social assistant at St. Augustine's Parish, the church I was baptized in, confirmed in, and married in. It's also the place I've always gone to when things fell apart. Faith for me was never just about belief. It was the place I stored my fear when I had nowhere else to put it. Today, my daughter Clara is receiving her first communion. She's 8, and this morning she told me she dreamt of the woman in black again. It was just after 7 a.m. when I went into her room. The sun was beginning to filter through the sheer curtains, painting soft gold on her bookshelf, her dolls lined neatly on the window ledge like silent witnesses. She was already sitting up, her white communion dress laid out beside her on the bed, untouched, like something sacred. "Morning, sweetheart," I said gently. She looked at me, her eyes still heavy with whatever world she'd just stepped out of. She wasn't smiling. "She came again," Clara said. I froze in the doorway. "Who?" I asked, though I already knew. "The woman in black. She was standing at the foot of my bed. She didn't move. She never does." I tried to steady my voice. "Did she say anything?" Clara shook her head. "She looked like she was waiting for something. She looked at the cross above my bed and then disappeared." There's a moment as a parent when logic wants to push forward, when you want to say, it was just a dream, or you were half asleep. But there was something about the way Clara spoke, the stillness in her voice, that made those words feel dishonest. Like if I said them, she'd know I didn't believe myself. We didn't talk about the woman in black again over breakfast. I made her favorite, cinnamon toast with warm milk, and she sat at the table staring at her hands. The dress hung on the back of the chair beside her, casting a long, pale shadow on the floor. "You're going to look like an angel," I said, brushing a crumb from her chin. "I don't want to wear the veil," she murmured. I paused. "Why not?" "She won't like it." I felt a cold ripple move through my chest. Who won't? But Clara just shook her head and went back to her toast. I tried to move through the rest of the morning like it was any other special occasion. Hair curled, dress zipped, white satin shoes fastened carefully. I played soft hymns from the kitchen speaker while I fixed my makeup. I prayed silently, not just for Clara, but for clarity. I wanted this day to be perfect. I wanted this day to bring her peace. And I needed, more than anything, that this presence was just the fading echo of her imagination. But at the back of my mind, something gnawed. A memory. 3 weeks earlier, I'd found Clara drawing in her room. She'd sketched the interior of the church in shocking detail. The stained glass windows, the long aisle, the crucifix above the altar, and standing beside it, a tall, dark figure in a veil, faceless. The figure had no hands. When I'd asked her what it was, she only said, "She watches." I'd folded the drawing and tucked it inside my Bible. At 9:30 a.m., we got into the car. The church was quiet when we arrived, only a few families trickling in, girls in white dresses, boys in pressed shirts and polished shoes. The air smelled of incense and fresh polish. Father Mateo was by the altar, arranging the sacred vessels. He smiled when he saw us. "Clara," he said warmly, "you ready to join the rest of us sinners?" She nodded, but she didn't smile. We took our seat in the fourth pew from the front. Clara kept her hands folded in her lap, eyes fixed on the crucifix. She didn't move, even when the choir began to rehearse. I noticed a flicker of tension in her posture, like she was bracing herself for something. As more families arrived, the church filled with the low hum of voices and rustling fabrics. I reached over and held Clara's hand. Her skin was cold. "Do you want to pray together?" I asked. She looked up at me slowly. "He's behind it." I blinked. "Behind what?" She lifted her chin. "The cross." And before I could ask what she meant, the organ began. Father Mateo stepped up to the pulpit and began the Mass. The ceremony unfolded with beauty and reverence. But I wasn't listening. I kept watching Clara, and the way her eyes never left the front of the church, not once, not even during the homily. When it was time for communion, the children stood in a single line. Clara was third. She walked slowly, deliberately, her gaze never straying from the crucifix above the altar. She reached the front. Father Mateo said, "The body of Christ." Clara accepted the host, made the sign of the cross, and turned to walk back to me. Then, halfway down the aisle, she stopped, turned, looked at the crucifix again, and said, clear, unwavering, and loud enough that people turned their heads, "Who's the man behind the cross?" For a second, nothing happened. Then, Father Mateo dropped the chalice. It hit the marble floor and shattered. Wine splashed across his vestments. The silence that followed was so complete it rang. I rose instinctively and went to Clara, but she didn't move. Her eyes were fixed on something behind the altar. When I reached her, her hand found mine. "He's not angry," she whispered. "He just wants someone to see him." I looked toward the crucifix. There was nothing there. But I believed her. I believed her completely. The sound of the chalice shattering echoed through the church like a gunshot. For a moment, time fractured. The choir fell silent, the organist lifted his hands mid-chord, and all eyes turned to the altar. Father Mateo stood frozen, his hands trembling, red wine blooming across the front of his white vestments like a wound. And Clara stood there, small, still, and unwavering, with her hand in mine and her words hanging in the air like incense. "Who's the man behind the cross?" I felt the heat of 100 stares crawl over us. I pulled her gently toward the pew, whispering, "Come sit, now." But her gaze remained fixed forward, unblinking. I had to guide her back into the seat. Her body followed, but her spirit, no, she was elsewhere. The rest of the communion proceeded, but it was no longer a ceremony. It was a performance under duress. People whispered behind hands. Some parents looked at me with pity, others suspicion, but no one said a word aloud. Father Mateo tried to continue as if nothing had happened. He retrieved a fresh chalice, murmured something to the altar boy, and raised his voice a little too high, a little too cheerful, as he resumed the rite. But it was in his eyes. I saw it clearly. Fear. Not confusion, not disbelief. Fear. When the service finally ended, families filtered out faster than usual. Clara remained quiet. I helped her down the steps of the church, half expecting someone to stop us, maybe Father Mateo, maybe another parent. No one did. Outside, the sun was too bright. The light felt wrong. I led Clara to the car, and only once she was buckled in did she finally speak again. "He's not gone," she said, staring out the window, "not like people think." I sat in the driver's seat for a long moment, key still in my hand. My heart hadn't stopped racing since her question. I didn't want to ask. I didn't want to give it life. But the words came out of me anyway. "Who, Clara?" She looked at me then, calm, steady. "The one they buried inside the church." The rest of the afternoon passed in slow motion. Back at home, Clara changed out of her dress without speaking. I took her veil, folded it carefully, and placed it back in its box. I sat at the kitchen table for a long time, my phone in my hand, unsure of who to call or what I would even say. My daughter saw a man no one else could see, in the church, behind the cross. And now I think she's right. I didn't know where to begin. Around 3 p.m., I finally received a message. From Father Mateo. "Can I stop by, alone?" He arrived half an hour later, still in his robes. Though the wine stains were faint now, someone had tried to scrub them out. I invited him in. Clara was in her room drawing. I hadn't dared look at what she was sketching. We sat across from each other at the dining table. I offered tea. He declined. "She's not the first," he said. I blinked. "Excuse me?" He looked tired. More than tired, unraveled. She's not the first child to say something like that in this church. My skin prickled. Then why didn't anyone say anything? Because we thought it was imagination or stress or a cry for attention. He paused. Until now. I waited. There's an alcove behind the altar, he continued. Used to be sealed, a forgotten part of the church. It was opened briefly during renovations about 15 years ago. The workers found something. A cavity in the stone. Inside, there was a rusted piece of cloth, a rosary, burn marks. I stared at him. You think someone was buried there? He hesitated. I think someone died there, and I think Clara saw him. He stood then, pulled something from his pocket, a small, aged photograph, sepia-toned, a young man in dark clerical robes standing beside the old altar, long before the renovations. This was Father Elias. He was assigned here in 1912. The records say he left the parish abruptly in 1915 and never returned. Did he? Mateo looked at me. I don't know. He left soon after, said he needed to pray. I believed him. That night, I sat beside Clara's bed, brushing her hair back while she colored with her usual intensity. I glanced at the drawing and felt my breath hitch. It was the interior of the church again, but this time from behind the crucifix, as if she were seeing it from the man's point of view. There was the congregation. There was the priest. And there, in the front pew, was us. She had drawn herself in the pew, and me, both of us in color. He, behind the cross, was in gray, and around his neck, a rosary with a missing bead. Just like the one found in the alcove. I kissed her forehead and said nothing. I couldn't. I left the room quietly and sat on the stairs for a long time. At midnight, I woke to the sound of whispering. Not Clara, not the wind. A voice, low and deliberate, echoing through the hallway, though no words were clear. I followed it, barefoot, heart pounding. It stopped when I reached the living room. And there, on the floor beneath the family crucifix, was the rosary from the drawing. Burnt, missing a bead. I didn't sleep that night. After finding the burned rosary on the living room floor, I sat in the dark for hours, fingers tight around my mug of cold tea, eyes flicking to the family crucifix on the wall. The air in the house felt wrong. Not cold exactly, but weighted, as if the walls themselves were trying to listen. When I finally climbed back into bed, it was nearly 4 a.m. Clara was sound asleep, breathing soft and steady, her arm curled under her cheek. I didn't know whether to feel grateful or terrified that she could rest while I felt like I was unraveling by the minute. I didn't go to work the next day. I texted the parish office saying Clara wasn't well. That wasn't a lie. She hadn't spoken more than 5 words since the drawing. She just watched me, as if waiting for permission to speak. By noon, I couldn't bear the silence. Clara, I asked gently, sitting on the edge of the couch beside her, can you tell me more about the man behind the cross? She didn't look at me. He's sad. Why? She hesitated. He thought someone would come for him, but they didn't. Did he tell you that? She nodded slowly. He doesn't talk like we do, but I know it. In here. She touched her chest. I didn't know what to say to that, so I just wrapped my arms around her and pulled her close. Her body was warm, solid, real, but something in her eyes felt far away, like she was drifting towards something I couldn't follow. That evening, I returned to the church alone. Clara stayed with my sister, who thankfully asked no questions. I drove through the near-empty streets with the windows cracked, trying to calm myself. I needed answers. I needed peace. I needed Father Mateo to tell me this was a misunderstanding, or at least a shared madness that made sense. But when I entered St. Augustine's, the air was colder than usual. The lights in the sanctuary were off, save for a few candles flickering on the altar. The scent of incense still lingered faintly, but beneath it was something else. A metallic tang, almost like rust or blood. Father Mateo was at the front, kneeling, head bowed. He didn't turn when I entered. "Father?" He looked up slowly. There were deep shadows under his eyes. "I tried to bless the chalice," he said hoarsely, "the one I dropped." "And?" He stood, walked to the sacristy, and returned with the silver cup, now dull, tarnished in patches that looked almost scorched. He placed it on the altar cloth between us. "Look at the base." I did. Engraved into the bottom, worn and nearly invisible unless angled just right, were 3 letters. E.D.M. "Elias de Montfort," Mateo whispered. "His name was engraved on several relics we found stored in the church's old crypt. Items that were supposed to be destroyed decades ago when Vatican protocol changed. I didn't know one had made it back into rotation." "Why would it matter?" I asked. "It's just a name." Mateo stared at the chalice like it might explode. "It matters," he said, "because the relics weren't removed. They were hidden." Later that night, I stood in front of my bathroom mirror brushing my teeth when I saw it. Not clearly, not even long enough to scream, but enough to know. A shadow moved across the hallway behind me, just past the open door. It didn't glide, it stepped. I turned, hard in my throat. Nothing. But when I looked back at the mirror, there was a fingerprint, a small, perfect smudge on the glass, high, higher than my head, as if someone had placed their hand there while watching me. I cleaned it. I told myself it was Clara. I didn't believe it. Over the next few days, things escalated. Lights flickered in the hallway at 3:17 every night, exactly 3:17. I started setting an alarm just to confirm it wasn't my imagination. Each night, I'd wake up, stare at the hallway, and wait for the flicker. And without fail, it came. One night, I stood in the dark and whispered, "What do you want?" Nothing happened. But the next morning, I found a page torn from my Bible left open on the kitchen counter. John 8:32, "And ye shall know the truth, and the truth shall make you free." I hadn't touched my Bible in a week. I went back to the church again, this time during daylight. The pews were empty, the sanctuary quiet. I walked down the central aisle, heart hammering with every step. I approached the altar, and I stood directly beneath the crucifix. I looked up. Nothing. Just carved wood, dust, silence. But then I knelt. And from that angle, low, near the altar rail, I saw something I hadn't noticed before. A seam. In the wall. Vertical. Narrow. Almost invisible behind the tapestry hanging beside the cross. I reached forward, ran my hand along it. The stone was cold, uneven. A line of tiny etchings curved upward, partially obscured by grime and age. I couldn't make out the full message, but one word stood out clearly in the middle: redemption. I stepped back, hands shaking. When I turned to leave, I saw her, Clara, standing at the back of the church. I hadn't brought her, but there she was, barefoot, still in her school uniform, eyes wide and tearful. "Mom," she said softly, "he followed you." That night, I didn't lock the front door. Not because I forgot, but because something in me had shifted. It no longer felt like locking doors mattered. Clara had somehow left the house and appeared at the church. I had no memory of her leaving. She hadn't spoken to anyone. My sister, who was supposed to be watching her, swore Clara had been napping the entire afternoon. I even checked on her twice, she insisted. She was under the covers, she was sweating. And yet, at 4:47 p.m., there she was, barefoot on the church floor, staring at the crucifix like it was about to speak. "He followed you," she had whispered. Followed me from where? I didn't sleep. Again. The next morning, Clara was already awake before I came into her room. She was sitting by the window, sunlight on her face, sketchbook in hand. Her fingers moved fast, almost too fast, like she was copying something from memory before it disappeared. I brought her breakfast, eggs and toast with strawberry jam, and sat beside her. "What are you drawing?" She held it up. The church, again. But this time, the man wasn't just behind the cross, he was kneeling. His hands were folded in prayer, his face was turned downward. But this time, his eyes were open. And there, in small letters scrawled across the bottom, were the words, "I saw him blink." I felt the chill crawl down my back like an invisible insect. "You saw him move?" I asked. She nodded. He blinked twice, slowly. And then what? He smiled at me, but not with his mouth, just with his eyes. I didn't know what that meant, but I didn't ask. I was too afraid of the answer. That afternoon, I drove us to the cemetery behind the church. I don't know what I was looking for. Maybe proof? Maybe peace? Maybe just a name? I told Clara we were going to visit an old friend. She didn't question it. We walked the winding path past ancient headstones, their names and dates worn smooth by rain and time. Some stones were so old they had no markings at all, just stone slabs jutting out of the grass like teeth. And then we found it. At the far end of the grounds, beneath a dying willow, was a marker so eroded it looked like it had been buried and exhumed. But Clara walked straight to it. "This is him," she said. I squinted. The engraving was almost invisible, but I made out something, a cross, and below it, initials, E.D.M., Elias de Montfort. Buried in unconsecrated ground, no dates, no epitaph. "Why here?" I whispered. "Because the church didn't want people to find him," Clara answered. That night, the drawings changed. I found 3 more pages torn from Clara's sketchbook left on my pillow. Each was different, more frantic, more detailed, more alive. In the first, the church was ablaze. Flames licked the stained glass. The crucifix was falling forward, splitting in half. In the second, the man was standing behind the altar, arms open, mouth wide in a silent scream. But it was the third that made me sink to my knees. It was me, in the front pew, alone, crying. And above me, floating, the same shadowed figure, not angry, not sad, just watching. I pressed the drawing to my chest, shaking. It wasn't Clara's imagination anymore. It couldn't be. The next morning, Father Mateo called. He was speaking fast, anxious. "You need to come to the church, now." I arrived 10 minutes later. He was pacing by the altar, holding a large book bound in black leather, the old parish registry. "I've been searching," he said, "and I found this entry." He flipped it open to a brittle page dated 1915. May 2nd. Father Elias removed from clerical duty after accusations from parishioners. "Accusations?" I asked. "There are no details, no trial, no defense, no burial record, just removed." I looked at him. "Do you think he was innocent?" Mateo's jaw tightened. "I think he was erased." We decided to open the old alcove. The seam I had found behind the crucifix, hidden behind the tapestry, wasn't decorative. It was a door, sealed long ago with plaster and paint. Mateo brought tools. I brought courage I didn't know I had. The process took hours. The stone was stubborn. The mortar was thick. But finally, the wall gave way with a groan, like it hadn't been touched in centuries. Inside was a small, dark cavity. A prayer chamber, maybe, or a cell. There was a single chair, a folded cloth, a broken rosary, and carved into the stone above the words, "I waited in silence. I died in silence. But I will not be forgotten." Clara was right. He hadn't moved on. He had waited. And now someone had finally seen him. That night, Clara woke screaming. I ran to her room, heart in my throat. She was sitting upright in bed, eyes wide, pointing at the corner. He was here. He stood right there. I looked, nothing. But her eyes, they weren't afraid. They were pleading. "He showed me what happened," she whispered. "They lied." "Who?" "The church, the ones before. They were afraid of him because he knew something." I held her close, trying to keep my hands from shaking. "What did he know?" She looked at me, tears streaming down her cheeks. "That they hurt children." And in that moment, I knew. This wasn't a haunting. This was a reckoning. I wasn't expecting a visitor, especially not a priest I didn't recognize, standing on my porch at 10:04 a.m. on a quiet Tuesday morning. He was tall, sharply dressed, maybe in his early 60s, with a narrow mouth that never quite formed a smile, even when he said my name. "Mrs. Rivas," he said, not asking but confirming. "Isabel?" I nodded, unsure whether to nod or step back. He held up a slim leather wallet, opened it like a badge. Inside, a polished silver cross and a card. "Diocese Oversight and Archives Office, Fra Lucien Moreau." "I'd like to speak with you," he said. He didn't wait for an answer. He stepped inside with the quiet confidence of a man used to unlocked doors and unspoken permission. I followed him into the living room, pulse fluttering in my ears. "Is your daughter home?" he asked, already scanning the room. "She's at school," I said, and instantly regretted it. He sat. I didn't. "What is this about?" Fra Moreau placed a small folder on the coffee table and folded his hands neatly over it. "I've been assigned to evaluate a recent spiritual disturbance connected to St. Augustine's. Your name came up, along with your daughter's, particularly after the incident during last Sunday's communion." I felt my stomach clench. "She only asked a question," I said quickly. "Children speak." "She saw something," he interrupted, "that no one else should be able to see." His tone was not accusatory, but it was cold. "I don't know what you mean." "I think you do." He opened the folder and slid a single sheet of paper toward me. It was a printed scan of an old registry, familiar now. The same one Mateo had shown me. But this copy had a red stamp across it. "Confidential, not to be circulated." "You're not supposed to have this," he said, "but that's not your fault. Mateo should have come to us first." "He was trying to protect her," I said. "From what?" He raised an eyebrow. "From the truth," he added. I didn't answer. He leaned forward, voice lower. "Do you know what happens when a child sees what isn't meant to be seen? When the veil parts for the innocent? It opens a door, and not everything that walks through it is a memory." That's when I sat down, because I knew exactly what he was saying, and I didn't like where it was going. Fra Moreau stayed for exactly 23 minutes. He spoke with precision, measuring every word like a chess player moving pieces. He confirmed what Mateo suspected. Father Elias de Montfort had been removed without trial. The records were sealed. No charges, no defense, just silence. Because silence was easier than scandal, Moreau said flatly. I asked why they buried him in the grounds. "They didn't," he replied. That made me pause. Then who did? He didn't answer. Instead, he asked me to give him any drawings Clara had made. "We'd like to archive them," he said. I said no. He stood. "As a mother, I respect your desire to protect your child. But understand this, Mrs. Rivas. Not all truths are safe. Some are burdens, and the church has spent centuries protecting its people from those burdens. He paused at the door. I advise you to stop digging, for her sake. And then he left. I watched him drive away, heart pounding. The air in the house felt thinner, like something had shifted. I went straight to Clara's room and pulled her sketchbook from under her pillow. Every page felt heavier now, like it wasn't just paper, but a record, a testimony. That night, Clara said nothing. She ate dinner in silence, went to bed without asking for her lullaby. At 2:41 a.m., I woke to the sound of footsteps. Not heavy, not threatening. Slow, measured. They came from the hallway, outside Clara's door. I opened my bedroom door, heart racing, and stepped into the dark. Nothing. No one. But I felt it. Not cold this time, but pressure. Like the air was listening. I went to Clara's room. She was awake. Sitting on the edge of her bed, sketchbook open in her lap. "He's waiting," she whispered before I could speak. "For what?" I asked. She turned the page to face me. It was the altar, the crucifix, the hidden door behind it, open now. Inside, a shadowed figure stood, and written beneath it, "He's not finished." The next morning, I went to see Father Mateo. The church was empty, the sanctuary silent. He looked older already, more fragile than before. When I told him about Fra Moreau's visit, he cursed under his breath. Not at me, but at the institution he'd given his life to. They sent him to contain this, Mateo said, not to understand it. I showed him the new drawing. He stared at it for a long time, fingers trembling. Then, quietly, "There's something I didn't tell you about the alcove." What? There were claw marks. He lifted his sleeve and revealed his forearm. 3 long red welts that hadn't healed right. They didn't come from stone. Later that evening, Clara approached me in the kitchen. "He told me something," she said, voice flat. I knelt in front of her. "Who?" She didn't blink. "Father Elias." My blood went cold. "What did he say?" She touched my cheek, so gently I almost cried. He said, "You'll see what they did, and you'll know why I stayed." And then she walked away, as if it was just another bedtime story. But I knew it wasn't, because that night I had a dream. I was in the church, alone. The crucifix loomed above me, but this time the figure wasn't behind it. He was in front of it, and he opened his mouth to speak, but no sound came. Just a rush of wind, and a single word carved into the wall behind him. Remember. They started at exactly 12:03 a.m. I had just drifted into sleep when the sound woke me. Not loud, not violent, but rhythmic, soft, deliberate. Footsteps. At first, I told myself it was the house settling. Old pipes, the usual things you whisper to yourself at night when your heart is racing and you're alone in the dark. But then I realized what was wrong. They were too measured. Not creeps, not clicks. Steps. One after another across the floorboards outside my bedroom. I held my breath, eyes wide in the dark. 5 steps. Then nothing. Then another 5. Then silence. I sat up in bed, afraid to breathe too loudly. The hallway was completely still. No wind, no shifting of air. Just the heavy quiet of a home that suddenly didn't feel like mine. I stood, opened the door slowly. The hallway was empty. But the crucifix on the wall at the end of the corridor, the one Clara made from pressed leaves in Sunday school, was upside down. I didn't wake Clara. I couldn't. Not because I didn't want to scare her, but because I had this sharp, irrational fear that if I opened her door, I would find her standing, eyes open, looking at someone I couldn't see. Instead, I went back to bed and turned on the bedside lamp. I didn't sleep. I didn't even blink. And at 3:17 a.m., right on time, the hallway light flickered. The next morning, I found muddy footprints in the hallway. Small, barefoot, leading from Clara's room to the kitchen. Except she hadn't left her bed all night. I checked her feet. Clean. I checked the soles of her shoes. Dry. There was no mud outside, no rain, nothing in the yard. But the prints were real. I wiped them away, heart pounding. When I asked Clara, she only said, "He's walking now." Later that day, she drew again. The picture showed our hallway, down to the crooked photo of my parents' wedding and the chipped baseboard near the guest room door. But the figure in the drawing wasn't a shadow anymore. He was clear, still faceless, but formed. Long, tattered robe, pale hands, and behind him, 4 smaller shadows, like children hiding in his cloak. I stared at the drawing for a long time. "What are they?" I asked. Clara didn't look up from her cereal. "The ones he's trying to protect." That night, I tried something I hadn't done since college. I prayed out loud. Not the rehearsed prayers, not Hail Marys or Our Fathers. I spoke as if someone was listening, and for the first time, I wasn't sure who that someone was. "If you're real, if you're here for her, please don't hurt her. Please don't use her." I waited. Nothing. But when I turned to walk back to bed, I passed the hallway mirror and saw muddy prints, not on the floor, on the glass, as if someone had pressed their bare feet to it, upside down. The following afternoon, Clara was quiet. She sat in her room, eyes fixed on the rosary that had reappeared on her windowsill, the same one I'd seen scorched on the floor 2 nights before. Except now it was clean, whole. Only 1 bead was missing. "He gave it back to me," she said when I stepped in. I picked it up gently. "When?" "While I slept." I hesitated. "Did he say anything?" She nodded. "He said he can't keep walking, not alone." I called Mater. He arrived within the hour. We sat in the kitchen, Clara in the next room drawing, humming to herself. Mateo looked worn, like he hadn't slept in days. "You said there were claw marks in the alcove," I reminded him. He nodded. "Yes." "Not animal?" "No, human. Desperate. And now this thing is in my house." He bowed his head. "I think it always was," he said quietly. "I think it never left." I poured him tea. He didn't touch it. "Is it trying to hurt her?" Mateo met my eyes. "No, I think it's trying to be her." The words chilled me more than anything so far. "Possession?" I asked, horrified. "No," he said. "Mediation. She's a vessel." He nodded. "He's telling the truth through her, and the truth is unbearable." That night, the footsteps came again. But they weren't alone. This time, I heard whispers. Soft, layered, like many voices at once, speaking in languages I couldn't place. Clara was asleep. The voices circled the house. I sat in the hallway with the rosary in my hand, whispering Hail Marys until dawn. When the sun rose, the crucifix was upright again. And all the lights in the house were on. Every single one. I waited until Clara fell asleep before I left the house. It was just past 10:30 p.m. I left a note on the kitchen counter, not for her, but for myself, just in case. "If you find this, it means I believed you." I went back to listen. The keys felt heavy in my hand. The road to St. Augustine's was empty, not just quiet, but deserted, as though the town itself had decided to turn away from the church after what happened. When I parked, I didn't use the main entrance. I took the side path between the old stone wall and the priest's garden, through the unlocked sacristy door. Mateo had left it open for me. The sanctuary was dark, except for the faint orange flicker of the votive candles. Their flames moved unnaturally, not from any draft, but in sync, as if something invisible had passed through them all at once. I moved slowly down the aisle, past the first pew, the second, the third, until I reached the confessional. It stood like a coffin against the sidewall, carved mahogany, doors slightly open. I paused, suddenly unsure, but something in me, maybe guilt, maybe desperation, pulled me forward. I stepped in, shut the door behind me, and sat in the dark. The small wooden screen to my right separated me from the other side. It was silent. I closed my eyes. "Forgive me, Father, for I have—" My voice faltered. "I don't know what I've done, or what I'm allowing." I took a breath. "My daughter sees him. I think she's channeling him. He's angry, he's hurt, and I don't know how to stop this from consuming her." The screen remained quiet. Then, from the other side, a whisper. "Children are vessels, so were we." I froze. The voice was not Mateo's. It was male, but older, broken, like something dried and stretched too thin. "Who are you?" I whispered. No answer. Then, "They locked me away for what I knew. I kept their secrets. And then I became one." My blood turned to ice. "You're Elias," I breathed. The air in the confessional grew colder. My breath fogged in the dingus. "I never hurt them," the voice said. "I hid them, protected them, from the ones who wore cloth and carried shame." My throat tightened. "Are you using Clara?" Silence. "Please," I begged, "if you're hurting her—" "I would burn before I touched her." The words vibrated through the wood. Then, "But she must speak. She must show them." The screen darkened, not as if light had dimmed, but as if something had moved between us all at once. "Show them what?" I asked. A pause. Then, "What they buried beneath the altar." I ran from the confessional. I didn't look back. I didn't turn on lights. I left the church through the side door, hands shaking, lungs raw. The stars outside were too bright. The moon hung low, like an eye. I drove home in silence. When I opened the front door, the house was quiet. Too quiet. Clara's room was empty. My chest collapsed. "Clara!" I called out, voice breaking. Then I saw the front door curtain flutter. She was outside, standing barefoot in the grass, facing the church, though it was a mile away. In her hand, the rosary, still missing one bead. I walked to her slowly. She didn't turn around. "He spoke to you," she said. I swallowed. "Yes." She looked at me then. "He's showing you now. You'll see it soon. You'll see everything." Later that night, I opened my Bible. Tucked inside, between Luke and John, was a new drawing. Not in Clara's usual style. This one was older, rigid, done in black ink, fine strokes, almost like a sketch from a century ago. It showed the inside of a small stone chamber. Children huddled, 4 of them. Above them, a priest in silhouette. But this one had no face, no features at all. Just a single phrase written below in Latin. Et qui sit, tacet. He who knows must remain silent. The next day, I went to Mateo with the drawing. He stared at it, jaw tight. "I've seen this before," he said. "Where?" "In the diocesan archives. In a folder marked Doctrine Deviations, 1915. They said it was a forgery, a warning against gossip in clerical education." "But it's real," I said. He nodded slowly. "It's real." That evening, Clara asked to sleep in my bed. She curled beside me, small and warm. "Do you think he'll ever go away?" I asked softly. She didn't open her eyes. "No, not until someone says it out loud." "Says what?" "The truth." The day we opened the chamber beneath the altar, the sky didn't look like sky. It looked bruised, a blend of violet and rust, as if something ancient was pressing down on the world from above. Even the birds were silent. I remember that detail most clearly, the absence of birdsong. It was just me and Father Mateo. He'd called early that morning and said 2 words. "It's time." No explanation. I didn't need one. I knew what he meant. I didn't ask permission. I left Clara with my sister again, though I wasn't sure that helped anymore. Wherever the ghost was, Clara was tethered to it. Not by proximity, but by something older than place. When we arrived at St. Augustine's, it was empty, a rare thing. The cleaners hadn't come, the pews were dusty. The light from the stained glass windows fell across the floor in long, blood-colored slashes. Mateo had already moved the altar cloth and candle stands. The stone beneath the crucifix was bare. "We have to go under it," he said, voice low. "There's an access panel behind the floorboard. I found mention of it in a repair record from 1934. We lifted the plank. Beneath it, a rusted iron loop in a square of dark granite. Mateo reached in and pulled. It groaned. Not like metal, but like breath. We stared into a black pit. "Flashlight," he said. I handed him mine. He clicked it on, and we descended. The air was thick. Not musty, not moldy. Thick, like it had weight. Each step down the stone staircase felt like sinking deeper into memory. A memory not mine, but forced into my skin. We reached the bottom after 23 steps. I counted. I had to count. It was the only thing that kept me from turning around and running back up. The chamber was small, cold, the air unmoving. And in the center, illuminated by Mateo's shaking beam, was a wooden kneeler, old and cracked. Beside it, a child's shoe. And beside that, a name carved into the wall. Lucienne, 1914. My mouth went dry. There were more carvings, barely visible, faded with time. A list, a litany. Jean, 1915. Thomas, 1914. Marie, 1913. And at the bottom, the largest, Elias. Not as a victim, as a shield. There was a folded cloth in the corner, a priest's stole, aged and stained. I picked it up. Tucked inside, a leather-bound journal. Mateo opened it with reverence. His hands trembled. He flipped through yellowed pages filled with small, neat handwriting. I read over his shoulder. "They told me to stay silent, that if I spoke, I'd destroy the church. But how can I bury children beneath symbols of salvation? They came to me, hurt, afraid. I gave them sanctuary in the chamber, but one of them died. Not by my hand, not mine. They took him, buried him separately, then came for the rest. I stayed with them. I starved with them until I could no longer write." Mateo turned to the final page, a single line. "If no one will confess, let the walls do it for us." We stood in silence for a long time. The only sound was the slow drip of condensation from the ceiling, rhythmic, like a pulse. "We have to report this," I said finally. Mateo looked at me. "And they'll bury it again." "No," I said, "not this time." I pulled out my phone. I took pictures. I took video of the names, of the stole, of the shoe, of the journal. And as I filmed, I heard it, a whisper. Not in my ear, in my spine. "Now they will see." Back at home, Clara was waiting at the door before I arrived. "I felt it," she said. "You found them." I knelt in front of her, tears in my eyes. "They were just children." She nodded. "He never left them." I hugged her tight. That night she drew again. This time it wasn't the church, it was the chamber. And in it, 5 small lights, like lanterns, floating above each name. Above them all, a hand, open, reaching. Beneath the drawing, she wrote, "Truth is light. He waited for someone to bring it." Clara stopped drawing that week. Not because the visions ended, because she didn't need to anymore. "He's not hiding now," she told me on Thursday morning, her voice calm and terrifying. "He wants to be seen." I was packing her lunch. I dropped the apple. "Clara," I said slowly, "what do you mean by that?" She tilted her head, like she was listening to something distant. "He says people need to look at him. Not just you, not just me, everyone." That afternoon, she refused to go to school, not in protest, just a quiet insistence. She sat by the window for hours, staring toward the direction of the church, lips moving wordlessly. I couldn't hear the prayers, or maybe they weren't prayers. Just after sunset, she turned to me and said, "They won't come unless I call them." "Who?" I asked, already knowing the answer. She didn't reply. But that night, every candle in the house lit itself. Friday morning, Matteo called. He sounded shaken. "I had a dream last night," he said. "Not like a dream, more like a memory that wasn't mine." "What happened?" "I saw Elias, young. He was in the alcove, writing. Children beside him, sleeping. He looked at me like he could see me, and then he said, 'You'll open the door, but she will walk through it.'" I didn't respond right away. Then, "She said something similar yesterday." Matteo paused. "She's the key, Isabel. He's showing the truth through her. But the moment is coming when that truth will need more than whispers. It will need witnesses." "What do we do?" "We let her speak." The idea terrified me, but I knew what it meant. Clara needed to go back to the church, not as a bystander, as a voice. I called the diocese. I requested a meeting, public in the nave of St. Augustine's. They agreed, reluctantly. Word spread fast. By Sunday morning, over 50 people gathered inside the church. Some were parishioners, others curious townsfolk, a few journalists from the local paper. No one from the Vatican, despite what they'd promised. Clara walked in calmly, holding my hand. She wore a simple white dress, the same one from her communion. But now it looked different, worn, like it had traveled through something. She walked slowly to the altar. Matteo stood behind her. No microphone, no stage, just silence. And then she spoke. "He waited," Clara began, her voice louder than I'd ever heard it. "Not because he was angry, but because you forgot." The audience shifted uncomfortably. "You forgot the ones who trusted you, the ones who were buried under the stones you pray on." Her eyes scanned the crowd. "And now he wants you to look." People looked confused, then frightened, and then the lights flickered. The candles, unlit, flared on, all of them. Matteo stepped forward. He held up the journal we'd found. He opened it. "He wrote this in 1915, he said. Elias de Montfort, a priest, a protector, buried by silence." He read aloud the final line. "If no one will confess, let the walls do it for us." There was a stillness that followed, a waiting, and then Clara raised her hand and pointed behind the altar. "There," she said, "now you'll see him." No one moved. Then one of the men from the local council stood. He walked forward. He looked behind the tapestry. and he screamed. What he saw was never fully described, but whatever it was, whoever it was, appeared to all of them. Some saw the chamber, others saw a child, some saw a priest kneeling in sorrow. No two visions were the same, but no one left the church the same way they entered. After that, the parish was closed for restoration, but everyone knew the truth. The story was printed, photos of the chamber, the journal, the names, all released. The church didn't issue a statement, but they removed Father Moreau quietly. That night, Clara slept soundly for the first time in weeks, and at 3:17 a.m., the lights did not flicker. I sat in the hallway just to be sure. I watched the door, the walls, the mirror, all still, all quiet. And in the morning, a final drawing sat on the kitchen table. This one was simple. A hand, open, reaching upward. Above it, a light. And below it, in Clara's handwriting, he doesn't need to be seen anymore. They remember. The house is quiet now. But it's not the kind of quiet that used to keep me awake, the brittle kind that cracked at the edges, filled with unspoken things. This is different. It's a quiet that breathes, a silence that holds. Clara hasn't drawn in weeks. No more figures behind the cross, no more shadows in the hall, no more whispering through the walls. Just the gentle rhythm of her steps in the kitchen each morning, humming softly as she pours her cereal. The way a child should move through the world, without fear of what watches from behind closed doors. And me? I still wake at 3:17 a.m. Not out of habit, out of memory. I sit in the hallway, wrapped in the robe I've worn since this all began, and listen. Nothing flickers, nothing shifts. And yet, he's still here. Not haunting, hovering. Not a presence, a witness. I visited the church yesterday. It's boarded up now. A "for renovation" sign nailed across the doors, though everyone knows no work will ever begin. A few candles sit at the steps, some burned down to wax puddles, some fresh. No one vandalized it. They respect the boundary now. Inside that building, something happened that no one can name, and no one dares to explain. But they believe Clara. They believe us. Because what she brought into the light was not a ghost. It was a truth too long buried. And truth, once seen, does not vanish. Mateo has stepped down from the parish. He comes by sometimes, not as a priest, just as a man. We sit on the back porch, watching Clara draw in chalk on the pavement, this time flowers and stars and cats with crooked tails. He asked me once, quietly, "Do you still believe?" I said yes. But not like before. Not in buildings or collars or creeds. I believe in what I saw. I believe in a man who waited over a century to be heard. I believe in a little girl who looked past the veil and never looked away. And I believe that silence is not always peace. Sometimes silence is complicity. And sometimes the only holy thing you can do is break it. The final drawing Clara gave me is framed above my desk now, the hand reaching up, the light above it, and beneath it, her words. He doesn't need to be seen anymore. They remember. I do, every day. The sky is beginning to turn. Outside the window, the first stars appear like breath marks on glass. Clara is asleep. The hallway is still. And for the first time in a long time, I lay down not out of exhaustion, but gratitude. Because there's a silence here now I've never known before. Not the kind you run from, the kind you earn. A different silence.